Thank you so much for being here. I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the last 4 or 5 months or so. You have been an engineer, you've been a developer advocate for a host of great companies from Adobe to LaunchDarkly. You're also a founder of various developer communities. Can you tell us about your journey? What are the steps along the way, and how did we get to now?
Yeah, so I mean, thank you. Thanks for having me, Finn. I've been a developer, so it's when you reach a certain point in your career where you start losing track. It's somewhere like I'd now to say 25 plus years. I got my start back in like the dot-com boom days, so like it was really easy to kind of get into development. But I've always, I didn't have a computer science background. I kind of self-taught really. And my background was more in like writing and communicating, stuff like that. So like um, when I got into being a developer, I started doing things like, I'm writing articles for these journals and I'm running conferences and running meetups and all kinds of things like that. And then so suddenly kind of led me into being a developer advocate. It was almost like I was already doing the job, but it was all kind of outside of work and the stuff I really enjoyed doing. And then I transitioned to like doing that first at Adobe and done it for numerous companies since. So yeah, it's I love doing this because it gives me a chance to both have an opportunity to learn continuously because that's part of the job, but also the opportunity to teach. And that's even like I love to learn, so that's why I start those developer communities. It's like, oh, I want to see these people speak, and I want to hear what they have to say. So like I start them, I mean, somewhat selfishly. It's like I want to hear this stuff, but I know other people do too. So that's where leads me to kind of do things like the CFE.dev site that I run, things like that.
What's changed about developer advocacy over the last, let's say, 10 years or even 20? I mean, how has developer advocacy changed based on what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, God, so much. Back when I got kind of started in it, you even would often hear it called like evangelism and stuff like that, but we kind of dropped that term. And I think it's gotten like back then it was really just about kind of going out and speaking, and you wanted people with big names that could draw big crowds. And it was like, I'd say, it really was the evangelism kind of thing. Like it wasn't so much as focused on teaching and on like um, kind of those core like enabling developers and things like that. It was more about getting the word out, it's still part of that, right? But I think that the role has changed a lot, and even now I often see startups who like their first um, non-engineering hire is a developer advocate. They're like, okay, it's marketing, it's everything, right? Like, and it kind of is, though that those can be challenging roles, I'll admit. But I think it's encompassed a lot more. So there's even multiple roles now in developer advocacy. Where it's like, before it was really just this one role. Now there's people who focus on writing, people focus on community, people who are those kind of road warriors going from conference to conference and speaking. So it's really changed a lot. And before it was like only a senior engineer could really transition to it. And now you see like a wide range of roles that fit different experience levels. And I think that's brought a lot of like new kind of different approaches to how we talk about things, being able to kind of give that oftentimes that kind of junior developer perspective to like really help people get started with the product, or people who are kind of new to programming and get comfortable with it.
It really is interesting to kind of think about how it's evolved. I love what you said. I'm curious if there are any techniques or frameworks that you've picked up that, maybe if you were imagining, a startup or kind of an early growth stage company listening to this, frameworks or techniques that you've picked up that would help them think about their own developer advocacy programs and how to structure those departments, those organizations in ways that can be really effective for them.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say for me, I think especially when you're talking about early stage startups, a lot of times it's kind of getting down to like the core value things that developer advocates do. So content is, in my opinion, it's always key. So like as an example, as a startup, I could spend a ton of money on travel and conference sponsorship and things like that, and actually it's hard to really gauge what the value I get out of it is, because those metrics are hard to track. But like, content has a long life. It can really it's great for building awareness. It's not expensive, really. I mean, you have to have somebody writing the content, but it's not like I have to pay for travel and meals and all this other stuff to get that done. So to me, like, focusing heavily on content and then on building your community, depending on what you're building. I mean, if you have have your developer advocates engage with the community and really kind of kind of and give them the opportunity to get more involved and to amplify that voice, because you're not going to have a big team that a larger company would have, but you can kind of take people who are passionate about your product, and with the right team in place, kind of engage them and give them opportunities to become kind of advocates for your product that are just not part of like the employed by you, but out there giving authentic, like, kind of endorsement of what you're building.
A lot of sense. Um, this is just a side anecdote, but I'd be curious to know how you would think about it. I mean, when you say content, do you mostly mean docs and blog articles, or do you mean other types of assets? And the reason I ask is because whenever I interview developers, I feel like I am always talking to a group of operators who have such different preferences around content types.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you can riff on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have some opinions on that. I am old school. I'm old, as I guess as well. So like,
I am
I
old and I am old school.
yeah, I tend towards like I think written content is I prefer it. That's the way I learn. I do understand like not everybody learns the same way, so I think you need to kind of have a strategy that addresses both like written content and video content and things like that, like whatever other kinds of content, whether it's like short form social media and things like that. That being said, it's I think written content tends to have a much longer tail, because like, video content is great, but it's hard to make. It's expensive to update, or difficult, to update. And so like, you end up stuck in this cycle where it's like, okay, I put out this video, but especially if you're early stage, hey, our UI changed and we added these features, and that's not in this video we spent a bunch of time and money creating. We need to redo it, or how do we fix it? And so video's tough, and that there's challenges with video that I think make it a little bit easier. Like, I tend to just push for like written stuff, because I can go back and update an article really easy, even get new screenshots, not a big deal. But a video can take a lot more work. But I not to say like I'd ignore video. Video's still really important, and I mean, I know a lot of younger developers who are like relatively new. That's literally the only place they learn. They're like, they don't even go to Google; they go to YouTube and they search. So you can't not be there, but you have to just choose wisely.
I love it. What about community? Like, so what is the intersection between content and community, and what have you learned about actually building real communities?
Yeah, it's you have to be patient. That's the key. You have to be patient, because it just really takes like, what I found building communities is that you reach a point where you're like, oh my god, I'm clearly speaking into the void, and I'm putting lots of effort, and it's just not paying off. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoop, oh, it took off. As long as you're doing things right, it will eventually take off. It's just largely a matter of persistence. Finding kind of creative ways to engage the community. And honestly, I wish I was an expert at it. I'm not like the best at it. Just partly because it really does, like, if you can afford to have somebody dedicated to like community management, then you should, because it really is a full-time job, because especially in the beginning, getting people engaged is just a matter of consistency. It's like, I need to post regularly. I need to kind of come up with creative questions to get them to like maybe engage in Discord or wherever I'm trying to get them to participate. It's I think there's this misconception that it's all organic, and it's really not. It's just a lot of hard work.
Agreed. Can you talk for a minute about what you're focused on now?
So I literally just starting at a company called LocalStack. So we're basically a drop-in replacement for like AWS to test locally. So you can run like all different kinds of AWS services, but on your local machine without the complexity of trying to push that out to the cloud. So I am like right now deep in number one, getting to know the product as well as I can, and really getting the opportunity to be very focused on AWS, which is one of the things I'm excited about. I've kind of done a lot of AWS stuff lately, particularly with LaunchDarkly. I did a lot of AWS stuff, but now I'm really focused on it. I'm excited about doing that.
Really cool. And speaking, to writing and to AWS, you've written, um, I think, incredibly important content around entitlements and SaaS with Bill Tarr of
Yes.
AWS.
hmm
Um, can you talk about that? That can you talk about that writing? I mean, the name of the title of the article was "Simple and Flexible SaaS Entitlement Management." Can you talk about why you wrote the post and tell us what entitlements are and why they matter?
Yeah, so I mean, Bill and I had been chatting quite a bit, and one of the things that even he helps SaaS startups who are building on AWS. So he's part of SaaS Factory at AWS, and that's kind of his whole goal is to help SaaS startups. And one of the struggles, like entitlements, is always a bit of a struggle. So speaking specifically to SaaS, I mean, entitlements are like I have access to X feature because I'm on Y plan, right? Like that's the gist of it, pretty simple in conceptually, but then how you implement that can be problematic. I mean, so many companies end up dealing with the fact that, hey, I put lots of if statements and other things in my application code to like deal with all these different things, and then oh, hey, we need to adjust those entitlements. I need to actually go change my code, redeploy, and all kinds of things like that, which is just it's just complicated. So the idea that we were trying to kind of propose is that feature flags, and then whether they're on LaunchDarkly or elsewhere, like feature flags are kind of a really easy way to almost to build that out to be able to kind of gate what features are available to whom, because you can use targeting to say, hey, this feature goes to these people on this plan, but also like not have it hard coded in your application. It's actually managed in your whatever platform you're using for your feature management. Um, and it also kind of keeps that separation from like I don't want to have necessarily everything regarding like I may already have an existing like application for managing like billing and who's on what's plan and so on and so forth, and I don't necessarily want to have that all in one place. I can actually then tie that in easily with feature flags to where I'm targeting based on that data, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not tied to a specific system, right? Like it's just I'm passing in metadata that's then used for targeting to determine what features you have access to. So it gives you a ton of flexibility. And like the other key thing that was there is like any kind there's two aspects I think to any kind of entitlement program that to make it that will really make it work for your business is number one, again, by taking it out of the application code, you're now giving that to the business where you can be a lot more flexible and say, hey, you know what, this we need to adjust this plan, and it's not going to be a huge cost, right? Like literally somebody could hop into LaunchDarkly or whatever you're using and just make those adjustments of how you target something, and suddenly this feature is now in that plan, without any redeployments, any changes to the application code, and so on. So it gives you that flexibility to really kind of toy with your pricing and packaging, which especially early on, it's going to be something you need to be able to do kind of quickly to adjust to things you see in the market. So that to me is key. But then the second thing is that even then, once you establish, okay, here we have these set of pricing and packaging, but you always are going to have exceptions, right? It's never going to be like a straight, everybody is going to be that way, especially when you start selling to enterprises where it's like, okay, we're going to throw in this feature for so and so, or we're going to give them access to these beta things we're working on, or things like that. So you need to be able to kind of override the baseline packaging and say, hey, this in this contract we wrote in that this feature, even though they're only on like our business plan, not on enterprise, we're throwing in this enterprise feature because that was part of the deal that we negotiated with them. Right. So you have to have flexibility. You can't, none of it can be very rigid. So feature flags allow you to do that. You can say, hey, here's my targeting for that says if you're on plan A, you get X, this list of features. But I can also override that with like individualized targeting. Say, also, if you're coming from this company, you get access to this enterprise feature that wasn't in your plan, kind of thing.
A big takeaway for me when you wrote the piece, and obviously I share the belief given what we're building the schematic, but was the idea that if we extend the idea of feature flags beyond traditional development use cases like deployment and rollout into entitlements and into pricing and packaging, you can remove a lot of what would be kind of engineering work that has to go into supporting monetization evolution over time, and you can empower the business to be really agile. Why do you think more companies haven't seen that or don't do that? Given many companies are now using third-party feature flagging tools or have built flags themselves, why has there been that disconnect between what a feature flag could be when extended into the entitlement use case?
Based on my experience, it's largely sometimes it's hard to break out of that what you're used to in a sense. When I talk to a lot of companies, even though they're like say they're using LaunchDarkly, and I can do all different kinds of feature flags, and I can have all kinds of targeting. It's like there's often a mindset of feature flag is either just on or off for everybody. Like it's true or false. It's just pure Boolean, right? And so it's hard to kind of think about number one, you typically think about feature flags as being temporary. In this case, they're not temporary; they're permanent part of your application infrastructure, right? So you have to kind of change your mindset about how you use them in that way. It's it it's it it's you end up building feature flags that are not kind of your typical like, oh hey, this feature is released. It's like I have to get into the targeting piece, which I've noticed a lot of companies struggle to get into like using targeting beyond like just, oh, I'm going to target my, this environment or things like that. They tend not to think about it in terms of all the capabilities that opens up when you are actually using that in your production application. And so like, I just feel like, yes, companies are moving to have actually started to adopt feature flags en masse, right? Like you talk to most developers on some level or another using feature flags. They may not be using a feature management system, which will limit their ability to do this, because most homegrown systems aren't going to be able to do that kind of targeting. Number one, but then also like they haven't yet gotten past like I wrote an article ages ago about stages of feature flag adoption, right? And they haven't gotten past like stage 2 or something where it's like I'm just using feature flags for release. I haven't really gotten past thinking like, whoa, what all of a sudden targeting opens up like that these don't have to be temporary, that we can manage. I can give like say a product manager the ability to create beta groups for beta features and say work with customers and say, oh, you suddenly get access to these beta features and I'm going to manage it that way. um and those kind of things really haven't entered their mind yet. Okay. And I think partly also because it's a developer tool and we're talking about entitlements as a business problem. It's not a developer problem, like in the sense of like, they'll build it whatever they need to build, right? Like they're not thinking about the pricing and packaging and the kind of complexity that comes with being able to like needing to make changes to that or who should be making changes, right? Like so I think that's the other piece of it as well.
I'm smiling a little bit because it's uncanny to me how similar what you're saying is to a manifesto that my co-founder and CTO Ben wrote like a year ago, where he effectively said, look, there's this disconnect between feature management as a term of industry and the actual feature management that goes on in a business.
Right.
And, he kind of goes on to say, like, look, we're all kind of used to the traditional DevOps use cases, but don't we do a lot more managing of features than this? Like every time, you do a custom override on a custom bespoke enterprise deal. Isn't that feature management? When a customer success rep enables an add-on, isn't that feature management? And he kind of goes on to posit, we have to kind of think about feature management, in the context of the business we're operating in. And if we do, it can be a really kind of like the power of feature management and feature flagging can become so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. I'd love to read what he wrote because it sounds like I'd be like nodding in agreement the whole time.
I think it was called his manifesto, or feature flags theory versus reality, something like that.
Hmm.
How did you, one more question here, but how did you identify entitlements as a problem and or opportunity for companies to know and understand with Bill, as you guys produced that content together?
I'm going to give credit. It was Bill who reached out, who was like, "Hey, I think, I knew somebody from his team. We'd worked together way back, and he knew I was at LaunchDarkly, and he was preparing something for reInvent a couple years ago, and so it started with just like, can I help him kind of think through the problem of like how you would manage entitlements with feature flags from a very, very high level. So this, we hadn't even dug into like the article and things like that. This was just a couple slides. Like, if you're building SaaS, here's things you might think about, like, and how you might manage entitlements is kind of a you know, eh, eh, basically every SaaS company is going to think about entitlements at some point or another. So it's something that was on his mind, and then he reached out. We just kind of continued the conversation from there, and then once like we felt like it really it fit nicely. It just seemed like this makes a lot of sense, and so it just was like, okay, let's kind of play it out. Like, how would you really start to put this thing together? The tricky part, of course, is like entitlements is different at every single company. So like, it was like, we went and we initially presented this at a conference, and it was like, okay, we're presenting a method. Like, this is not the solution, right? Because your entitlements are going to be different than the entitlements we're talking about. We're just kind of taking a kind of generic use case of like a typical entitlement setup. But it's really interesting when you talk to companies that there's always tons of nuances in how they handle it based on the type of application they're building.
At this point, do you think it's valid to say that feature management is at the root of a lot of modern monetization complexity in B2B SaaS?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it should be. it's I think you can definitely simplify your entitlement setup, and simplify the way you kind of reduce the complexity in general terms, in terms of how you build out entitlements and how you kind of release those, how you adjust them as your business goes along. So I mean, if you do adopt feature flags for this, I think it's really gonna find it's incredibly powerful. And I think, to me, it's like, I can't think of a better solution to it. I mean, honestly, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, feature management is all about gating features, and entitlement is all about, well, how I release certain features. So the two things seem to just fit together perfectly. Um, so yeah,
It's like a really, really clean architecture.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Brian, thank you so much for doing this. It's been so much fun. One question I always like to ask at the end is what's the experience or moment, and really the moment, that has had the most important impact on your career, or most formative impact on your career?
So I'm going to say it's really interesting because sometimes insights come from the oddest places, right? It's not always like, oh, I had this great experience at this wonderful place, and this mentor who taught me these great lessons. And I think the lesson I learned was I was actually at a terrible job that I hated, with a terrible boss. And but she said to me one time that, that basically I came back with a lot of, why we can't do something, and instead of being coming back with like, I'd say, no, we can't do that because of this and that and whatever. And it wasn't like I didn't have a solution. And so I'd pose all the difficulties without posing like the potential solutions. I think changing that frame of mind for me, like, was like, it took a lot of practice because I was so used to kind of, I'm a skeptic by nature. And so, like, it's easy for me to pick apart an idea and figure out all the potential pitfalls, instead of basically being like, okay, I see these potential problems, but I mean, here, like, yes, we could do this. What if we thought about it this way? What if, like, just present an alternative, or even, just it, present solutions potentially. It's like, okay, I see these potential problems, but I think with some thought I might be able to solve them, kind of thing. So, just being a little more open to finding solutions and presenting them, and not being, kind of fighting off that natural skeptic nature, got me a long way. So, I think I'm a much easier person to work with because of it, to be honest. But, I shortly, thankfully, left that job, because, it, despite learning that, it was still a terrible job.
It's a really great story. I think it resonates with a lot of people. I certainly have found myself, when you're kind of like not being solution oriented enough or not being positive or optimistic enough, you can really like affect the energy levels of teammates. Where can
Absolutely.
people where can people learn more about you, reach out to you, get involved with some of the communities that you've helped to grow and catalyze and nurture?
I think the best place to find me is, I'm running, like, I run presentations and all kinds of other shows and conferences, all virtual, on cfe.dev. So that's I would hope people come join that community. It's all free. There's like hundreds of videos going back like 7 years of presentations. So it's all like completely free. Something I do for fun and to kind of give back to the community. But you can also find me on, my blog is remotesynthesis.com. And, has all my contact information. I'm like on Mastodon, Threads, whatever. You can find me on most social media, not the bad place. I mean, I'm technically still there, but I won't ever check it. So, yeah. Anyway.
Thank you again, Brian. So much
Yeah.
fun. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Vin. This was great.